Ready to start. Number of announcements. I need an agenda somewhere, don't I? I've got hundreds of bits of paperwork here, so I'll tear that out. Good. So I'll start with apologies for absence, and I have apologies from Councillor Peck and also from Councillor Islam. And any other apologies? No. Happy New Year, everyone, by the way. We've got one or two directors away. So, yes, Mr. Tuckley is tucked away somewhere. And one or two people are away as well, aren't they? So, Children's Services. In fact, most of them are. It'd be quicker to summarise the people who are here, actually. But, yeah, so Amanda Dalby's away. And one or two people are here. So, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest. Are there any that people need to make? Nope. Okay. Unrestricted minutes. Are we happy to approve them? Councillor Blake.
Yes. On page 12, big numbers, 12, under resolved number 2, to delete and area after forum. Decisions will be taken and then insert on the forum and area boundary at the earliest opportunity.
So in order to be transparent about that, so I'm happy to agree that change in the wording, but to be transparent about that, can you explain what's happening in case people run away and say this is a subterfuge designed to deny people a forum?
Okay.
Because, I'll be very clear that we want to go ahead with the forum, but we need to agree, the minute it needs to record, we need to agree the boundary as well as the, what's the other bit we need to agree?
The boundary and the area.
Boundary and the area, yes. Yeah. Okay. And that will come back. That can be done under executive powers. I think that's what we agreed to do at the last meeting. There's a counter view that maybe, to be transparent, it should come back to a full cabinet meeting, but I'd like to get a move on with it. So I'll speak to the local members.
Do you want me to say anything else?
Yeah.
Well, just to refer back to the minutes, then that there was quite a detailed conversation at the meeting about both on the Isle of Dogs and on the Spitalfields Neighbourhood Planning Forum and area. But with regards to the Isle of Dogs, the discussion, the detail was about the area and debate about the area and inclusion of different parts of the Isle of Dogs. And that minute does seem ambivalent in terms of the designation of the area because the area wasn't agreed within the meeting. So it would seem clearer to, in principle, approve in principle a designation of a forum, which I think we did and we were positive about, but then to confirm that decisions taken on the forum and area boundary are yet to be made.
I'm happy with that. I've just found on this, you get all sorts of lists, and I've found that, just for the record, we have apologies from Will Tuckley, Stephen Halsey, Debbie Jones, and Amanda Dalby, and they're all being substituted, other than Will Tuckley, who doesn't have a substitute, but Melanie is sitting next to me, and will prod me in the ribs at the appropriate moment, if necessary. Okay, I hope not, actually. But, so, I've had notice of desire to speak from Councillor Golds on items 5.9 and 5.16. Okay. Well, I just finished. Actually, no. Tell us what your point on the minutes is.
Sorry, it's just a quick thing, but on quite an important agenda item which we're discussing tonight as well. So on page 11, 5.5, in relation to Majleesh, the second paragraph says she recommended option C to F be rejected as not providing best value. I think it would be a better reflection of the conversation we had to say not providing best value nor being practical or feasible given current circumstances, because it wasn't just a decision that we took based on value for money but also other risks and considerations. Okay. And given it's quite a complicated issue, I think it's important the minutes are right.
I'm happy with that. So shall I retrospectively agree for the second time the minutes as slightly altered? Yeah? Okay, that's good. All right, shall we move on then? So as I was beginning to say, we've had a request from Councillor Golds to speak on items 5.9 and 5.16. Also been advised by ONS that they want to make particular comments on 5.5 and 5.7. But at this point on the agenda, I'm inviting the and so we'll take that as those items. Better remind me. But at this point, I can ask the chair of ONS to report on any issues raised by OSC, other than those, I suppose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last night, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee met. First day back, tough. And we had, first on the agenda, 2 reports in regards to the issue of leaseholders and leaseholder charges in Tower Hamlets Homes. The reports have been referred to the new Chief Executive of Tower Hamlets Homes, and a request has been made that they report back on the implementation of the various recommendations in the boat reports within 3 months. Looking at this issue began in 2008 and has gone on for a number of years. Let's hope that 2016 is the year that we begin to resolve this issue for leaseholders locally. And I welcome the item on the agenda tonight regarding charges for leaseholders for major works. We then looked at the budget monitoring for the 6-month proposals. And we had concerns about the underspend in adult services and children's services. It's 6 months in now. There are both underspends there are savings to be made of practically £1 million in each budget, and we haven't had any information on that as yet, and we wanted to know what the process would be and how we would understand how those proposals are going to come forward. We also had a long discussion with Councillor Edgar on the HRA account and the challenges and what will happen going into the future. I think everyone felt as well there's a real challenge around the papers in the committee, and I think there was agreement that we could look to, going forward, a digital solution that would enable us to really delve into the detail, particularly around the capital spending. It's difficult for us to scrutinise the headlines, and we wanted to really delve into the detail of those. We then looked at the gambling policy, and there was a good debate around, the parameters of the policy and what can be achieved, particularly in regards to fixed odds betting terminals. And then we had discussions around what the council could do in supporting residents around gambling, and we may do a future scrutiny role in regards to that. We then had the mayor as the lead for strategic performance, bringing us through the monitoring report, and we had a detailed discussion on the concerns around recycling and the challenges locally, particularly that the council will have to get up to 50% recycling rates by 2020, which is a big challenge, and the issues around fly tipping and staff sickness. And we also welcomed and would want to look at how we can improve the monitoring. We welcomed the detail. There was a lot of detail for us to get through, but I think more can be done in terms of that. I also wanted to highlight, I've now had the report back from officers in regards to the questions that we raised at the budget scrutiny. I'd like to thank everyone who submitted to those. It's very clear that some officers have made a real effort to respond to what we requested for. It's also very clear that other officers haven't, and I will be sending back some of the reports for further information. I think it is the challenges of what are to come in terms of the budget and accountability in this council are really important. We, as a scrutiny committee, need to be able to see that officers have looked into the issues, have assessed the risks, and are able to explain their thinking and their reasons for their decisions. Going through this report, some officers haven't been as open as we would expect. There is an opportunity for officers to reconsider those reports and to bring forward an updated version so that we can do a detailed discussion in the budget, the next budget scrutiny meeting on the 18th. But I think there's a real challenge there, because there's a big difference in some of the reports, and I think there really needs to be a push to get this really sorted out, because the challenge of next year is so great, and I think we need to be able to see the detailed thinking that officers are doing around these proposals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And So we'll go through the agenda. Perhaps I should say that it is quite a long agenda this evening. So we have our budget papers, which are about that thick, and the rest of the agenda, which is twice as thick again. Size doesn't necessarily imply it's going to take that long to deal with all the items. There are a few changes to them. I should have done this earlier. The budget's got its own pack of papers, which I think is available at the meeting, and Councillor Egger will speak to that in a second. There is a tabled amendment on the budget, which is about consultation responses on 2 further savings proposals, which people should have in front of them. The report, item 5.5, is entitled HRA Budget Setting, is in fact the HRA Rent Setting report, so we just need to be clear that that's what it does. And the Carbon Offset Solutions report has an appendix, which quite properly, being a carbon offset report, hasn't been printed in many copies. I have 2 copies in front of me. And if anyone wants a colour copy, they're very welcome to take it home with them. But it's available around the room if people need it. If I can move on, given the length of the agenda, we probably need to keep our contributions fairly brief, if that's possible. But with that caveat, let's move on to item. There have been no call-ins under item 4.2, so if we move on to 5.1, which is the general funding. Capital Budget and Medium-Term Financial Plan 2016-17. This is for Councillor Edgar to speak to, and then I'll say a bit as well.
Thank you. I will be as brief as I think I can be on this. It's a slim volume of 532 pages. I've read nearly every one of them. And what it does is extend the medium-term financial plan by 1 year to 2019-20, so that it lines up with the government's period of spending review. And there are still a number of uncertainties about our financial position next year and in future years, because I think the figures the government has given us so far are provisional figures. They're indicative and they're not finally confirmed. And there are also elements of the settlement which still haven't been set out. So we got this very shortly before Christmas, and there are a number of things that we still need to learn. So there's still some uncertainty. We're looking at various elements of the report. On page 1771, there's a list of the savings, and within the report in Appendix 9, I think it is, and the documents that have been tabled today, there's a summary of the consultation that's taken place with public and users, where savings would have an impact on services, and also with staff and trade unions more generally, and that feedback is within the report. I don't want to talk about all of the savings, which is good news. I just want to talk about some of the ones that John and I have considered in particular and want to make some variation on. So saving 1 is about the review of day services for older people, and we might need to finesse the form of words, but we want to agree that in principle, but that the Mayfield House element of the review of day services for older people is not taken until alternative arrangements in place. So there's clearly a need to actually make sure that there are proper arrangements in place before we take that element of what will contribute, I think, in financial terms to the whole saving. But there are other aspects of the review which I think can proceed. Then there are 2 savings which it's proposed that we don't make. We've looked at saving 21, which is the proposal to save money by reducing or stopping Sunday idea store opening. We've looked at the response. It's one saving that produced probably more response than any other from the public and also from staff, and we propose that we don't proceed with that, having considered all of those responses. Then on saving 40, which is a reduction to the corporate match funding budget, we don't propose to take that saving because we now have secured a bid. I think it's a bid won by London councils that requires match funding, and clearly we need that match funding money in order to match that bid. Then moving on to growth. The growth items are listed on page 40, and I think they give, I suppose, an indication of pressure both from inflation and also from growth in particular areas of the council's budget. And one of the larger ones is the demographic pressures on adult social care. It's 1.9 million next year. That reflects the growing population we have and other demographic changes. Another large one within that list is the implementation of the ethical care charter involving paying home care workers for travel time. And that's a political commitment the Mayor made, I think, at manifesto stage, and the amount that that would cost in 2016-17 is about £1 million. So those are 2, I think, items of growth which are a part of the reason why we also feel in the savings area that we need to consider charging for community social care services. Obviously, that consideration, as it says in the savings report, will be subject to full consultation, would be means tested, there'd be help for people if we did proceed to make sure that they're getting all of the benefits they are due. There are a couple of other savings that I wanted to highlight, one of which was £500,000 for street cleansing. It's an area that people in the borough are concerned about. They want our streets to be clean. Some money was put into that budget, I think, in the first amendment to the budget back in July. But this includes a proposal, this budget includes a proposal for an additional £500,000, with the detail of what exactly that would involve still to be worked up. And another item is £500,000, once again with the details still to be worked up, towards antisocial behaviour. Again, I think this is a key priority for a number of residents. It's something that people talk to most councillors about, and we need to make sure that we're working out ways in which we address that. So I think an important part of the way in which we approach both growth and inflation is that we make sure that there's actual need demonstrated. So the amounts of money that are provided within this budget, this medium-term financial plan, are released as the need is demonstrated during the course of the year. So where it turns out that we don't need those amounts of money, then we won't spend it. I want to move on to council tax. Council tax is discussed on pages 18 and 19. Currently, the council tax in Tower Hamlets is the 6th lowest in London. So of the 32 boroughs plus the City of London, we are the 6th lowest. And it's proposed to increase council tax by 2% for the precept for adult social care that the government announced in the spending review. And they've assumed that councils will levy this increase when they've been calculating the funding that they believe is available to councils next year. And I think the pressures that I mentioned earlier on in the adult social care budget and the growth of picnic next year are other reasons why we do need to make that increase, that precept. And the effect of that will be to increase the annual Band D bill by £17.71 a year. And it's also proposed to increase council tax by a further 1.99%. And that, I think, needs to be seen in the context of the fact that the government has scrapped the council tax freeze grant from next year, which it had previously made available to councils who didn't increase their council tax, and which helped this council keep its council tax down. If you look at the numbers in the medium-term financial plan, you can see that this council tax is increasingly important for us, given the levels of reductions in the government's revenue support grant. If you look at that plan, you'll also see there's a need for very substantial savings. So £30 million needs to be saved in 2017-18. So in that context, we think it's right that a proposal goes forward to increase the council tax by 1.99, and the effect of that annually would again be 17.71. But that increase there is only assumed in 2016-17 in the medium-term financial plan. So a larger increase next year than is currently assumed in subsequent years. Just want to move on to reserves. Reserves dealt with on pages 19 and 20. There are no budgeted contributions to the general fund reserves over the period that this plan covers. The reserves are expected to fall. The ones that are available to the council to use for general purposes are expected to fall to about 36 million over that period. And the biggest impact on the reserves is going to come from earmarking £20 million as contribution to the cost of new civic centre and local service provision. We've made the decision that we do want to open that new civic centre. It's something that will save the council money in the longer term and also allow us to build more homes in the borough. So 20 million of that, of our reserves, are earmarked for the contribution to the cost of that. And the reasons, the risks that mean that we do need to have reserve are the things that are set out on pages 24 and 25 and 472. So a picture of why we need reserves and what we might need reserves for is set out within the report. And then just fairly briefly on some other elements of the report, new homes bonus is dealt with on pages 14 and 15. You'll see from those pages that there are lots of uncertainties and risks associated with this source of income. And one of the ways in which this plan tries to reduce or manage those risks is by reducing the reliance on the new homes bonus in balance in the budget over the next few years. So any income above those assumed in balance in this budget will be used to support a capital programme for affordable housing, and infrastructure affordable housing clearly is an issue that's of great importance to people who live in this borough. Public health grant, there's a reduction next year of 666,000. It will continue to be used to fund free school meals over and above government policy. We still don't know an element of it. There's a responsibility was transferred to us for 0 to 5-year-olds in October 2015. We don't know, I think, anything about the amount that we're likely to get in 16-17 on that yet. I think that's one of the things we expect to find out this month. The capital section of the report, summarised on pages 26 to 28, it sets out the major projects, including the Civic Centre. And one of the things I think we do need to do is to review and update the capital strategy. That was last done in 2011, and clearly we need to have a look again about we're a number of years on now. The world has changed significantly. We need to have a very, I think, substantial review of our capital strategy. Schools funding set out in quite a lot of detail on page 475 onwards. It sets out the discussions that have taken place at the schools forum, the reports that they've had. I think that one of the things that schools are very conscious of is that the longer-term review of schools funding that is likely to take place by the government, is planned to take place by the government, is likely to result in a significant reduction in funding for town at schools, and that's something that we and schools would need to be thinking about and are thinking about. The recommendations in the report to the Mayor are on pages 2 and 3. First of which is to agree a general fund budget of 358.774 million. But that will obviously be subject to the impact of savings that are not taken, the ones I talked about earlier on. Agree a council tax increase of 3.99% for the reasons that are outlined in the report and which I've briefly gone over earlier in this introduction, and to agree the items listed for public consultation and consideration by Overview Scrutiny Committee. Overview Scrutiny Committee on January the 18th will look at this in detail. I'm looking forward to that scrutiny session, as I always do. There clearly will be plenty to talk about, and there's also a need for the Mayor in the recommendations to consider the items listed at the foot of page 2 and on page 3, which are many of the things I've touched on in this introduction. Thank you.
Well, that was refreshingly brief, and I wanted to add a few things just to add to the brevity of the occasion. So, this is my first budget as Mayor, and so it's a pretty important occasion for me, and for the council. Hopefully, I might make a very clear sort of opening comment, which is that this is very much a sort of work in progress. I've been Mayor for about 6 months. We've had a new Director of Finance, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Holm for the work he's done in the interim on that as well. Director of Resources, who's been helping to pull together the picture. I think, without wanting to, I'm not mentioned to make a particularly political statement, but I think it is a matter of record that for reasons which may or may not ever become known, the previous Mayor didn't really think about the sort of strategic reorganising work that needs to take place given the scale of cuts that the council is facing over the next few years. And so over the next year we need to go through a fairly continual process of reviewing our budgets and looking at how we can better fit the council to the resources it has. We're not in as bad a position as some councils up and down the country, but we still have to make fairly significant cuts. So this year a saving of £15 million was set as a target. We're looking at about 17, but that's because there was a number of growth items, and as Councillor Edgar has said, there's a number of the savings which we think may not deliver on quite the scale to which we're anticipating. So we need, during the coming year, to carry out a number of reviews with our new Chief Executive and with our management team. Want to give a very clear signal to staff that we very much value our staff here, so we're not scything into the council with an axe or anything like that. We want to preserve excellent, high-quality services delivered by really well-motivated staff. But there are going to be some tough decisions, and the second thing I want to say is that I really loathe the political doctrine that says that politicians are infallible and they never admit to mistakes. So I'm sure I'll make some mistakes, and I'm sure my colleagues will make, obviously, even more mistakes than I'll make. But that's that's the nature of the beast. And but we learn from our mistakes, and one of the advantages of being relatively elderly, I guess, is that I've made lots of mistakes in the past, which I've learned. So hopefully I've got some better idea of how we can do stuff. But we will make mistakes, and we'll learn as we go along. A number of these savings I just wanted to comment on briefly. One is the Greenwich leisure saving, and I just want to be very clear that we're not giving a signal that people can just go away and sign a new contract with Greenwich leisure for those services. As with all of these proposals, detailed proposals will have to come back to the council in the appropriate place, whether it's the full cabinet, in order to make sure that we're getting proper value and that we understand exactly what the implications are of the savings in front of us. There's been some lobbying already, and I'm sure this will come up again during the budget process because it's quite a lengthy process over the next couple of months, on the waste theos, as their the shorthand name is the waste theos, and I think that's saving number 31 in the budget papers, and we will go away and look at that. I mean, the advice we've had from officers is that that is a saving that can be achieved without diminishing the quality of the service that's provided. But obviously it is quite a challenging saving, so we need to examine that as part of the process, and I welcome the sort of scrutiny that we'll have as part of that process. The early years saving, number 13, is quite a large, ambitious saving. We're repeatedly assured that that can be achieved without diminishing the service or its quality. We need to look at quite how that happens, and I think there's continued thinking within the Children's Services Directorate about that, and so there will be further reports on that one. As Councillor Egger has said, got a couple of particular priorities which have come from my office about growth. One is about investment in the waste contract, which would be roughly another £500,000. I've got some fairly good ideas about what that's going to be spent on, but it will be coming back in the appropriate way to Cabinet or through other announcements if we need to get a move on with it, to improve the frequency of street sweeping and to improve some of the bumps in the way the cleansing service has been working, because in my view the cuts in its funding were possibly a bit too great. Similarly with antisocial behaviour, all members get regular concerns from residents about ASB and its different forms. We need to make sure that we are we have the capacity and we're fit for purpose in dealing and challenging that. We can't solve every problem, but we need to be responsive to people, such as with our 24-hour response, but also if you get a telephone answer 24 hours a day, then it actually needs to lead to something happening a bit further on down the line. Otherwise, people will find that as a rather empty promise we're making to them. The benefit changes, the welfare reform agenda from the government is presenting a real challenge to us in town. It's because we have this strange contradiction of quite a lot of wealth in the borough, but massive poverty as well. And so we're going to continue for this year with the council tax scheme that helps people meet their payments. But I'd note that we're one of the few councils left in the country that's still doing that, and I'd like us to continue with that. But with the welfare reform agenda and with greater difficulty with the other thing, which is about discretionary housing payments, we are going to have some very hard choices to face over the next few months. And so I just want to advise people that although that doesn't feature directly in the budget, we're funding some top-up of the grant we get from government, but with the rising rents and the changing government policy, we're going to face difficulty in meeting the rent payments of some of our particularly private rented tenants in the borough who are on housing benefit, and that's something that alarms me. As Councillor Egger said, we currently have the 6th lowest council tax in London, and I'm intending that we should continue in that position. The nice Mr Osborne has followed the logic of his rhetoric in devolving some power to cities and local government by more or less expecting us to raise our council tax by 2% to pay for adult social care. And when I attend London Council meetings, I'm fairly clear that virtually all the London councils are going to be taking up that option, as will many of them from all different political flavours, the 2% potential increase in their precept to help meet their budget gaps. And so I'm minded to recommend that we have a 3.99% increase this year. I'm not very hungry to have regular increases of that scale, but let's see what the government doles out to us in terms of its grant payments and its financial settlement and expectations from us, because it is quite a challenging world that we're in. The beauty of this year's council tax proposed increase, which will be discussed by the whole council, is that because Boris Johnson, who I was discussing this with earlier today, interestingly, in another place, is reducing the precept from City Hall, it will actually lead to a very small increase for local residents. And so there we are. There's a windfall from City Hall, which will help us carry out what I think is quite a necessary change in our town hall. As Councillor Egger said, we are going to invest in the civic centre. We want to find more land available for housing to be built, and that's not directly a general fund responsibility, but there will be ways in which we'll be looking at that. My ambition is to have a well-motivated workforce, as I said, who provide excellent services for local people. The people who've been through this before will know that this is just starting the ball rolling, if you like. So this is our budget proposal for this year, which obviously I'm recommending that it be endorsed and agreed by the council, but it will go through ONS and it will go through the council, preferably once, possibly twice, and then we'll see what our final budget is for next year. But it's going to be quite a challenging time, which is part of the fun for being here. And hopefully we will use this as a catalyst for some of the more general changes in getting a more sort of professional political organisation here, so that we can focus on the needs of local residents. I've said almost enough, but are there questions from members or other observations? And there don't have to be. Rachel Saunders.
I just wanted to raise one point following a conversation I had with the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny earlier on today, and conversations with officers this afternoon, which is the CAM savings proposal, which I think is another one which I just think we should record that we'll keep a close eye on. It's one where we are in a partnership dialogue with the East London Foundation Trust in terms of being able to deliver it. So it's an ongoing set of conversations about how we deliver that saving. I think it's just worth noting that it's something that it's conversations that we're continuing to have and we'll be as transparent about as we can.
So for those who don't follow this stuff, that's the Children and Adults Mental Health Care Services, which are provided and funded jointly by ourselves and the NHS. Is that right? Yep. Yeah. Okay. So we now, any other observations? No? Amy.
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly to emphasise what Councillor Edgar said about the 2% rise for social care. I think it's really important that we're doing that, because not only do we have a local budget pressure, which we'll talk about later when we come to the Q2 reports, but it's well known there's a national crisis in social care, and what the Chancellor is proposing is not the solution. As we all know, it's very far from it, but that 2% rise doesn't even cover the demographic pressures that we are putting through in our growth bid. So it just shows the scale of the challenge that we still have. But I think it's really welcome that we're taking that step to try and put social care on a slightly more sustainable footing going forward. The other thing I just wanted to flag is that quite a few of the adults' proposals, the amounts may look reasonably small relative to some of the others this year, but it's partly because some of them are part-year savings, because they're transformation pieces of work where we're reviewing services or reviewing care packages, or indeed the charging proposal that Councillor Edgar mentioned would need to be fully consulted on, and again echoing what Councillor Saunders said, that would be done with full transparency before we could implement that. So quite a few of the adults changes are part year and with a view to them being full year in subsequent budgets.
Okay, any other comments, observations? Good. Councillor Edgar, do you want to respond to the two, or indeed my contribution, at your peril?
It's a temptation I'll resist.
Okay, so we now have a bunch of recommendations here, which are on pages 2 and 3 of the main agenda, and I'm happy to agree those, but where there are a number of amendments. Can you just run us through, Councillor Edgar, what you think those amendments are?
Okay, so the amendments which have an impact on recommendation 1, which is the budget, are in respect of savings, one of which was, I think, the agreement in principle of saving 1, but that the Mayfield House element of the review of day services for older people isn't taken. That element of that saving isn't taken until there are alternative arrangements in place. So I think in practice that means the entire amount of that review is attributed to that particular saving, that's my understanding. So the notion would be that review could continue, but that particular element needs to be resolved and alternative arrangements in place. Then that we don't take saving 21, which is the proposal to save money by reducing or stopping Sunday Idea store opening, given the results of the consultation and our consideration of that. Then saving 40 isn't taken. That's a reduction to the corporate match funding budget because we need it to match some funding. So the figure in 3.1, I think, needs to be adjusted by the amounts associated with each of those savings.
Okay. Zena Cook, do we need to amend any of our recommendations in the light of those oral amendments to the proposals?
At this point, we wouldn't need to do that.
No, so it doesn't affect the bottom lines at this point. Okay. Good. In that case, I propose with those caveats we agree the recommendations in the report. I would say that this, although this may seem pretty wicked stuff in some places, I don't think it is particularly, but obviously there are people who'd be unhappy, and I'm very much embrace the democratic process in which we're going to scrutinise it over the coming weeks. But this is relatively speaking, I think, a relatively easy bunch of savings compared to what was likely to happen in the next year when we have a far bigger savings target. So we just need to be grown up about that, but in a vigorous and aerated democratic context. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations in front of us and move on to the next item there, which is 5.2, which is to consider the council tax base. Now, I think you can propose this if you want, Councillor Egger. This is a fairly formal report in terms of, this is in the main agenda report, page 15. But it's fairly formal, isn't it, in terms of something we need formally to adopt as a local authority as part of our budget making.
It is indeed, and it's also fairly short. It's 5 pages, not 500. It's fairly technical. It does illustrate the growth in the council tax base as the number of properties in the borough grows, but I think you can agree that recommendation quite easily.
Are there any other comments, questions on that? No, I'm happy to agree the recommendations in that report. We can move on then to item 5.3, which is the local council tax reduction scheme. I referred to this when I was referring to the budget. I'm happy to move the item. Councillor Egger, again, this is fairly technical. As I said, life will get more challenging, and we're one of the few councils that is still doing this, but I'd like us to continue for the coming year and see what we can do into the future.
Yeah, it is fairly technical. Involves just continuing with the current scheme for next year, so the arrangements wouldn't change for next year, but it also says that we need to review the scheme alongside the impact of the government's welfare reform changes. John talked a bit about those on things like discretionary housing, pot and other areas, and to produce options for the future of the scheme. So keep it for 16-17, but do the work which allows us to review options for the longer term.
Okay, I'm happy to agree that unless there are any other interventions. No? Okay, 5.4, fees and charges. This is, again, quite a technical report. There have been some late questions and observations from Cabinet members, including Councillor Peck, who is not here this evening. But David Egger, do you want to speak to this?
I do. So fees and charges by the council, there are hundreds of them. If you look at the list, it's amazing how many there are. They produce about £30 million worth of income. It's proposed that there are no increases in a number of areas, and that where there are increases, they're generally ones that are set at the level of inflation or arise because a government grant has been reduced, or that we have to recover our full costs. So on the whole, there are quite a few no increases and quite a few which are simply at the level of inflation. And the proposal on this is to recommend the fees in the report to the full council. But it's also, I think, recognised that we need to have a comprehensive review of our fees and charges, and we need to think about the relationship between our policy objectives and the fees that we're setting. Are we doing things by way of fees in a particular area which actually don't help us achieve the policy objectives that we have? So I think there needs to be a comprehensive review on that. And I think early priorities within that review would be, for example, the community social care charges that we've already talked about this evening. And we've had an issue raised by one of the Cabinet members, for example, about changes in the charge for display of goods and other public space. It's an area that's been raised by some traders, apparently, so there might be particular things we need to look at early in that review. But I'm obviously open to your view about how we deal with that particular proposal. My understanding is that we can recommend this full set of fees and charges, but if there were particular ones that we wanted to vary during the course of the year, we're able to do that. But I'm open to Corporate Director of Resources correcting me on that.
That is correct.
So it's a very comprehensive clarification. 3 words. So, so you're saying that if during this year we were, for example, to look at, I don't know, charges for a particular activity and conclude that our economic objectives would be better achieved by varying those downwards or upwards?
As long as there's a formal decision, whatever the change is, that would be considered by you and approved.
Okay, no intention upwards, I don't think, unless it forms part of a logical, sensible thing to do. So with that caveat, I'm happy to agree the recommendations in the report. Okay. I leave my microphone on, don't I? Because I don't chair I don't have a separate chair. I am my own chair, which is remarkable. We now move on to 5.5, the Housing Revenue Account Rent Setting Report. Now, technically, this would be, well, according to this, it would be Councillor Blake, but I think it would have been Siraj Islam, I think. But anyway, but he's not here. So, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, I think in previous years we have had more discretion over this rent setting, and it would be subject to more debate. There are 5 recommendations in the report. The main one is that we recommend reducing our rents by 1% for each of the 4 years from 16-17. This is a central government directive, as per the Welfare Reform and Work Bill. The other recommendations refer to depooling communal electricity charges and the impact that will have on service charge. The final 2 recommendations regard noting the risks that are detailed within the report, and I recommend to you the description of pay to stay and sale of high value properties. It's particularly interesting and important to understand the impact that these changes can have on not just our HRA but where we live. And finally, to note that a budget which is informed by this rent change will come forward to the next Cabinet meeting.
Okay, are there any questions on this item? Oh yes, of course, you're quite right. Councillor Pearce, and I think Councillor Golds wanted... No, you're later, aren't you? Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, there was a question from last night's scrutiny in regards to whether there will be an appeal process for local residents who are brought into the pay-to-stay proposal.
Can you clarify what you mean by an appeal process?
So, government policy comes in place. A tenant is told you are going on the journey of pay to stay and your rent will increase up until a certain point. Will there be a localised appeal process?
There's obviously a means testing involved, and Councillor Blake.
Yeah. As we understand at the moment, there's more work to do on how this will be implemented, but as we understand at the moment, it will basically be a levy. Is that fair? And so we'll be given a bill that we'll have to implement, and from which we will be increasing those rents. So we will be the charging authority for that. But overall, we will have the bill to pay. I think Chris might want to add something.
Just to confirm, because this won't be implemented till the 17-18, so there's still a lot of work to come out and sort of directions to come out from the government on how it will operate yet. So we're still waiting on that, those guidelines and directions.
And the report, there's a tabled amended report. I can't initially see what's different in it from the previous.
The first one said it was a budget report, but it's actually a rent setting. Yeah.
So we have an agenda with the carbon offset solution study report on it, and as part of that we have reprinted the whole report to change one word on its cover. Is that right?
It's not quite true. Now, there is the additional report. There are some changes to the legal comments to reflect some of the issues within the paper. That's why you've got the paper.
We will debate this at a future Cabinet meeting, but clearly the Chancellor, in setting the 1% cut, seems to be motivated by reducing his housing benefit bill, but in doing so is placing quite serious challenges to the viability of some housing providers, hopefully not our own. But it's going to be a challenge. We'd all assumed a rate of RPI type increases in rents, and changing that. I think the wider housing world understands this, but the wider public in town, who superficially might be attracted by a 1% cut in their council in their rents. Well, probably they don't need to understand this because they will see a 1% cut in their rents. But for the council, it does present a very real problem. For some of our housing providers, an even bigger one. So we're worried about that. We're doing quite a bit of work to see how we can help to meet that challenge. One of the things to do is to cut down the cost base of the housing providers, which is potentially quite challenging when they have a bunch of needs to meet, which other housing providers possibly don't have to meet. But let's see where we go with that. I'm happy to agree the recommendations in the report, and look forward worriedly to the next one. We now have 5.6, which is the Corporate Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report, and this is an Edgar-type report.
Thank you, John. So the good news from this report is that on the general fund budget, we are expecting to break even this year. which is obviously good. But the report does identify that there are particular areas of pressure, so social care pressure is talked about in paragraph 4.5 on page 168. Children's services and adult care services are also talked about in a bit more detail on the next two paragraphs. And so, although the expectation is that we're going to break even this year, there's still, I think, quite a lot of work to do and quite a lot of scrutiny that I and other councillors, cabinet members and the mayor will be involved in. On the Housing Revenue Account report, it's projecting an underspend of about 800,000 this year. That's on page 169. That reflects, I suppose, some big changes up and down, high number of right-to-buy sales than were expected. I think increases service charge income, reduces rental income, so there are some quite big variances in there with the net impact of a HRA with expected underspend of 800,000. Then the other area which is dealt with in this report is the capital budget. So one of the things that's happened is there's been a change in the profile of expenditure over the next few years. So the amount that's expected to be spent in this year, as I understand, has come down to about 119 million from 211 million at earlier reports. But even of that lower amount, only 23% has been spent so far, and it's a regular feature of my comments on these reports that I'm concerned to make sure that we do spend at the rate at which we should, because clearly not spending this money is simply delaying a number of things, and some of those things are really important for people's lives. So at the moment we're projecting, I think, some slippage into next year on work on decent homes, and that means that the things that people need to have done in order to improve their homes are not happening as quickly as we'd like. So I and others, I'm sure, will be putting work into understanding why that's happening and what we can do to improve it.
Are there any questions on that, Amy?
It's not a question, just wanted to draw people's attention to the fact that the summary of the expenditure on page 167 includes, for adults, includes the drawdown on reserves and grants that make a balanced position. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record on the crisis in social care, but just for people to be aware that the true sort of pressure is clearly in the report on page 180, where it talks about £5.8 million of overspend, which is a demand-led pressure around care packages and home care budgets, which just is important to flag given what we've talked about in terms of savings and other budget considerations.
Okay, well, welcome that comment. Any other observations? I don't think that you need a response to that, do you? Nope. And I suppose I wanted to add, actually, that we had a very vigorous discussion at ONS last night, which I welcomed. Other than the fact that I was told I'd only be there for 10 minutes and was there for 3 hours, I thought it was a very welcome discussion. And so I'm happy to agree the recommendations on 5.6. 5.7 is the 6-monthly strategic performance monitoring report, which is my report. And it's, again, we were given a very vigorous, it was 5.6 and 5.7 together that had quite a long examination at ONS, together with another report with Sharia Khatun on gambling policy. And on this, it highlights progress in most of the areas, which is positive. It highlights a number of areas where we have a challenge in meeting our strategic targets. We debated this at great length at ONS last night, and anyone who wants to can examine the record on that. I think I'd like we've inherited this performance monitoring framework, which I think is generally pretty good. We might want to tune it a bit in the next few weeks and months. I'd recommend everyone reads it, particularly, I was going to say particularly if you can't get to sleep at night, but it's actually very important in terms of understanding how the council is performing against some of its key targets, and scrutinising it from all sorts of directions will help us to be a more efficient and effective authority. Do we have any observations from members on this or any particular questions? I think Councillor Pearce wanted to speak on behalf of ONS.
Yeah, there are questions which you will have. Has everyone had the papers? So there is one around, are we now on track for the delivery of all 800 places for 2-year-olds? There's a question around reasons for delays in regards to the commissioners. And there is questions in regards to the SEN statement around benchmarking with other boroughs in regards to delays and the quality plans in the SEN review. And there's been a report which has come forward. There was a request that we see the report, and I'm sure we'll come back with further questions once we have.
Well, I think these are all targeted at Councillor Saunders.
So we believe we are now on track in terms of the 800 places disadvantaged 2-year-olds, and some of that is in the report later on the agenda in terms of capital spend and in terms of continuing to meet those objectives. Reasons for delay regarding the commissioners, we're over it now. I think essentially there are administrative processes that were put in place in the early days of the commissioners entering the council, which are now in place, and capital works are going ahead. So that has, whatever issue there was in the past has, we think, now been resolved. On the conversion of SEN statements into education and healthcare plans, it has in general been delayed. We're doing better than others. Many local authorities are falling behind the government's expected rate of transfer, and the government itself has already extended its own deadlines. But there's no question that it's a really significant amount of work and a strain on the system.
So are we doing worse or better than other boroughs on that?
Everyone's behind. We're doing a bit better than some.
But not others?
Yeah. But we're doing all right. In terms of comparing to others, we're doing all right. But everyone's behind, and it's a really significant and important piece of work, and important to do it well. It's not something that you can. It's better to do it well than to do it, too quickly. In terms of the report to the Health and Wellbeing Board on a campaign to ensure children are registered with a GP or dentist, the January Health and Wellbeing Board agenda is now a workshop on the new health and wellbeing strategy. So a paper on the GP and dentist issue written jointly with the CCG will come to the March board. So it's in the plan. The question about the review which has been tabled, undertake a beginning of life review of all services to improve integration outcomes for early years health. There's a number of review pieces of work going on. So there's a question that Councillor Hassel has asked me previously about the Mayor's manifesto commitment to a broad early years review. I think what was in the paper refers to the Cordis Bright Commissioned review on early years and children's services. We are working through a first version of what Cordis Bright has given to us, and Councillor Pearce and I spoke earlier about making sure that we report that back to Overview Scrutiny once we've had a conversation with the Mayor about it, in terms of what it tells us about our early years and children's services from a kind of external objective point of view. There is then further work to be done in terms of what the future of those services looks like, which needs to go through all decision-making processes over the next few months. But we are hoping that some of the recommendations from Cordis Bright will be taken forward in collaboration with the CCG through the Vanguard programme, as well as those recommendations which are a part of our own work on children's centres and early years. So I think there's two things going on here. There's one thing which is the Mayor's manifesto commitment, which we will meet during the term of a full review of early years, beginning of life review. I think the review which is mentioned in the report is a more specific review, which is a part of meeting. Well, it's two things. It's meeting the budget saving that we need to make, but also improving the service and improving its reach and its impact. So the Cordis Bright review, which the paper refers to, will come back to ONS. The more general beginning of life review is something we'll do more work on, potentially in collaboration with the CCG. The next question about whether the work on mental health is on target. So there's work being undertaken by the Council with the CCG to develop the borough's child and adolescent mental health services. It's ongoing. Again, I think this is one of those conversations where there's one issue which is budget saving, but there's another issue which is the broader review of the service that's ongoing. So we'll be as transparent about the budget saving, but I think it's important that our conversations are also about the whole transformation of the service and the budget saving in that context. So work on that is ongoing, and you'll get further written information following email exchange and conversations earlier, but I hope we can also have conversations once our work with the local foundation trust has developed in terms of what the future of the service looks like.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's very comprehensive. You're content, Councillor Pearce? Okay, any other members want to speak on this item? I was going to say three things. First is really pleased that the 800 additional places are going to be delivered. I think there's a further challenge, which is making sure that the right 800 children take those places, and I think we're aware that there are some bits of the community in Tower Hamlets and some geographical parts of the borough which are getting a poor take-up, and the evidence about early life and interventions and support given to families, particularly people in some personal difficulty, is pretty overwhelming in terms of improving life chances. So that's got to be a priority. Second thing I wanted to say is the commissioners aren't an unmitigated good. I thought I might as well say that publicly. Yeah, I'm very happy to work with the commissioners. I love the commissioners. We work with them quite regularly. I meet them but sometimes there have been some bureaucratic hold-ups involving them, and I'm looking forward increasingly by the day to the opportunity to welcome a diminution in their powers to the point of extinction. And this is an example where there was a delay because of the bureaucracy of their decision making, and we need to help them to do better. Perhaps we should give the commissioners an improvement plan as part of our relationship with them, given that they've given us one. And but we do like them, of course. The other thing I wanted to say then is, obviously, legally and formally, I chair the Health and Wellbeing Board, but I've de facto delegated that to Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs to chair the meetings and to prepare their agendas and deal with their business. But I keep quite a close eye on it. So I'm trying not to be negligent, but I'm trying also to be a reasonable delegator. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations, unless there are any other comments, observations on this. Nope. Okay. Should we move on to 5.8 then, which is the Children and Adult Services Capital Programme, which again is Councillor Saunders.
With Councillor Whitelock-Gibbs as well. So, I mean, the report is what it says. It's a capital set of proposals, capital programme. It may just be particularly important to note that some of what you've seen before in terms of our response to the urgency of providing school places is set out here in terms of a number of capital expansion plans and a capital estimate for fees for the London Dock site, and that you should also note the progress with creating early education provision and further consultation with providers as shown in Appendix E. But there are other parts which also relate to Councillor Whitelock-Gibbs.
Thank you. So just briefly, the elements that relate to health are about, firstly, so allocation of some Section 106 monies which have been unallocated, obviously, until now, and they will be going to 11 GP practices, which are set out at 3.30. That sets out which GP practices. The idea of the Section 106 grants for those will be to redesign existing practices to increase the capacity on those sites, which is really important, as I know the CCG are always concerned about increasing capacity in primary care. The second element for health is William Cotton Place, which is mentioned also on page 290 at the bottom, and that's about fitting out a part of that development so that St Paul's Way practice can move into better, more purpose-built accommodation. So all of it's about improving primary care for local people, which is a really positive story, I think.
Okay, very happy with that, and I'm happy to agree. You can switch your mic off, Councillor Saunders. Sorry. Good, so we can hear your thoughts. But actually, leave it on. Leave it on. It was interesting to know. But I'm happy to agree with the recommendations in the report. We have a question, however, from Councillor Blake.
It's more of an observation, I'm afraid.
It's a shame.
Sorry. It's just a flag that later on on the agenda we're talking about our infrastructure delivery framework, and to note that that operates over a longer time, so that will be operating over a longer timescale than that which we have in front of us, and to ask whether it would be possible to work with to Councillor Saunders about a longer timescale for some of this, because I note that very few of those schools are in some of the higher growth areas within the borough.
I think we need to take that. I think we need to take that offline and discuss it. But there is within there, I think, a fairly significant point. Sort of. Okay, I'm happy to agree with the recommendation in the report, and we'll talk offline about that other matter. Now on to 5.9, which is extended payment support options to leaseholders. Now this would be Councillor Islam's report, but he's not here, so I guess that sort of falls to me. But Jackie Ojanoy can perhaps talk to this. I think it's quite important that we spend a little bit of time considering this because it's a very important issue from the residents' point of view, and it's been waiting for a while. Because you're a leaseholder, yes, and I think, and Councillor Ayas Mir is a leaseholder, and I'm a leaseholder, but not of the council. So there we are. And Peter Gold has indicated he wants to speak on this item as well. But do you want to hear Jackie first?
I think maybe help and probably may well reduce my contribution.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just introduce this very briefly.
Indeed.
As everyone knows, we've been undertaking the Decent Homes programme, and we're in the 5th year of that now, and that's really brought to a head a number of issues around major work service charges. The payment options, suite of payment options were previously agreed by the Mayor and Cabinet in January 2013, and what this report does is to look again at the payment options that we might give to leaseholders who are faced with potentially very large bills. We have to balance the need to be very fair and flexible with their payment options with the need to make sure that we collect the amounts that are due for the work so that we don't put any additional strain over the longer term on the housing revenue account, because it's very important that we collect the charges that are due under the terms of the lease. We've also taken into account, as we've said in section 3.4, the Social Landlord's Mandatory Reduction of Service Charges England Directions 2014, which is colloquially known as Florey's Law, which capped leasehold service charges at £15,000 on works partly or wholly funded by the government. Because we got additional Decent Homes funding for this year, that applies to the Decent Homes funding, and those sections explain that the result of that, our estimates are that about 1.06 million of the works that are chargeable to leaseholders will be unrecoverable because their bills will be capped, and as such we've effectively top sliced that from the additional 13.27 million grant that we've got from government to undertake the works. In terms of the payment support options, which are shown in the report and also in the first appendix, we have, and I'll run through them very briefly, we are recommending that we extend the 5% discount for prompt payment to all invoices over £1,000. It's currently £2,000, and full payment is made within 90 days from the date of the invoice. So you get 5% if you pay within 90 days. The reason for it recommending we move to 90 days, which is currently 28, is that on very large bills, leaseholders often prefer to extend their mortgages, and 28 days, as we would all know, is not really long enough to extend your mortgage, which is why we're suggesting 90. And then we're suggesting a range, 2 years interest-free for all leaseholders with invoices over £1,000, resident and non-resident, and non-resident because they get a year anyway in terms of their lease, and we're trying to get a balance between, with non-resident leaseholders, if we give them that extra year to pay, the view is that we'll actually get the money in. If we give them a year to pay, they will then, a number of them don't pay, and we then have to pursue them through the court. So we're trying to get a balance between what's reasonable to do for non-resident leaseholders and also gets our money in. Up to 5 years partially interest bearing for all residents with bills over £2,000. These are now resident leaseholders only, interest free for the first 2 years. And then the addition of an up to 10-year payment period, interest free again for the first 2 years, and then interest bearing for the remainder of the term for resident leaseholders with bills of over £10,000. we've always had the ability for leaseholders over 60 or receiving full benefit, which means that they are predominantly or wholly dependent on benefit for their household income, to put a voluntary charge on the property. That is an interest-bearing charge. We then get our money back when the property is sold. We do have to make allowance for statutory council loans to leaseholders who have bought within the last 10 years. That has to be in the form of a mortgage, because that's what the statute says, and very few leaseholders actually take advantage of that. The reason being that our interest rates are generally higher than they could get by mortgaging at the moment on the open market if they need to take a mortgage. That's probably all I'd want to say by way of introduction.
I wanted you to labour that a little bit, because obviously every member will know that this is quite a contentious issue for people, particularly older people, and particularly people on lower incomes who face recharges for works to their properties. And so I think we've tried to be equitable. Can you answer one question, which is some local authorities offer longer interest-free periods than we're offering. Why shouldn't we?
I think it's, and I know exactly which authority you're referring to, and I think it's more that they offer the same extended period but a longer interest-free period within the 10 years than they offer more than 10 years. What we've tried to do here is, as I said in my introduction, balance out what is fair to a leaseholder and gives them an ability to pay with protecting the housing revenue account. This recommendation, and there is a table in here, shows that it does both, because the housing revenue account isn't disadvantaged by this. If we offered much longer interest-free periods, there would be more of a cost to the housing revenue account. It's also our understanding that where potentially more favourable terms have been offered, they were actually offered after the Decent Homes programme had been completed. So for bills going forward, where there will be less large bills than we are currently looking to collect. So they did it effectively at a later point in the cycle to offer even more generous terms when they wouldn't anticipate so many large bills.
Now, if we're lucky, you have addressed all the points that Councillor Gold. If we're unlucky, otherwise we would be denied the opportunity to hear from Councillor Gold. You need to turn your microphone off, Jackie.
Thank you very much. In fact, my input has been reduced by a third. I just ticked off one of the. I do think it is particularly important that we look to our residence leaseholders. I think they are the ones that would most often come to the surgery, and you often find they're the ones that have the most problems. And I think they're the ones that we have the most duty of care to, the people who have bought their properties and live in the borough and remain our residents and our council taxpayers, and people who are part of our wider community. So I am delighted to see what we have seen there, and I think that is something, as I will come on when I conclude the points I wish to say. I think it's very important to note 3.2, leaseholders who have bought should understand their financial responsibilities, and I think it is important that it is put there. But as recently as yesterday's overview and scrutiny, the problems of Tower Hamlets homes were not resolved. You, Mr Mayor, were present when we raised them last night. We went through a checklist of issues. When it came to leaseholders, still a great deal needs to be done, and I note there are changes in Tower Hamlets homes, and I very much hope that that will come forward. My final point is that on the recommendation, which I very much hope that you in Cabinet will approve, on item 3, you will be authorising the Corporate Director of Development, Renewal and Law and Probity to enter the necessary documents to implement the decisions. May I hope that they'll be expedited, and may I make one request that a brief on this is provided to members so that when residents and leaseholders visit us as our regular advice surgery, we know and have it very simply exactly what is in front of us. One of the more frustrating things I think every member ever has is when people come in and you spend 20 minutes listening to rumour and innuendo and end up by having to say to the resident that's not correct, or submitting a member's inquiry to prove that is not correct, when if we have a pretty succinct piece of paper which we've got there, we can possibly photocopy it and hand it to them or read it from them. So I would very much hope that you will publicise this and make it available in as many ways possible as members. Thank you very much.
And obviously this deserves a feature in the soon-to-be extinct East End Life, but because it is the very sort of public information that people should be getting as well. But I endorse everything you said, I think. Was that reckless to endorse everything Councillor Gold said? No. Any other members want to comment on this? And do you need any answers to your questions or any clarification, do you think?
The East London Advertiser could also include this,
I'm sure
as the East London Advertiser is present today.
I'm sure. Well, it will be very. Hopefully, it won't satisfy everyone, but it will clarify the position. I was first briefed on this about June last year, so I'm not sure why it's taken 6 months to get to Cabinet, but it has taken 6 months to get to Cabinet, and here we are. We can get a move on with it. And I'm acutely aware that a lot of people who exercise the right to buy have, for all sorts of reasons, such as ageing, retirement, have a much reduced income and have great difficulty meeting these bills. So we need to be business-like but compassionate in the way in which we deal with this. And hopefully this policy will clarify it to the point where we will be. So thanks for that, and I agree the recommendations in the report. Shall I move on then to the next one, which is, and thanks for your contribution, Councillor Golds, 5.10, implementation of a new infrastructure delivery framework, and Rachel Blake.
Thank you, John. This report recommends a new process and system for administering and reporting both SIL and Section 106, and so replaces the former Planning Contributions Overview panel. A helpful diagram is provided on page 337, which sets out the structure for decision making within the new infrastructure delivery framework. And I'll briefly explain a two-stage process, the first of which regards ring-fencing SIL funds into different pots for different items of infrastructure, and the next stage would allocate funds to projects. The infrastructure delivery framework has two levels: an infrastructure delivery steering group, which will be chaired by the Corporate Director for Development Renewal, and will be an officer-led group which will feed into an infrastructure delivery board chaired by the Mayor and attended by members of the Cabinet. And the board will make recommendations to approve expenditure and decisions which will be made by the Mayor in Cabinet. Just to emphasise that this report merely sets out a framework for decision making. It doesn't recommend levels of expenditure at which decisions will be made, and it doesn't refer to any projects individually. Can I just refer members also to an interesting section from paragraph 6.24 onwards regarding the neighbourhood proportion, which gives a highlight of a matter that will be coming back to Cabinet, because it's another element of SIL that we need to make a decision on how it's administered. But the recommendation is to approve the formation of the infrastructure delivery framework, which is a two-stage and two-level decision-making framework for SIL and Section 106.
Okay, any questions, observations about this? While people are thinking about that, I'm pretty clear that this is, apart from being the right thing to do, is part of the transparency agenda, because in my view, for many years this has been done somewhat under the cover of darkness through officer panel with obviously good intentions. I don't think anything dodgy has happened, but I think in terms of transparency and accountability for what becomes public money following these contributions, we need to be open and clear about that, particularly given the demands for infrastructure investment in the borough, which we need to address fairly urgently, and we need to be very clear about those in terms of the ability to fund them and the ability to look elsewhere for funding for them as well. Are there any questions, observations about this? No? Okay, I'm happy to agree the recommendations, and we're going to move on with this. So, thanks. Moving on then to 5.11. wherever that is. That is Carbon Offset Solution Study, which is a thrilling report. I shouldn't say that. It is quite a technical report, and I challenge there to be more than one person in the room who's read it. Councillor Blake, you are that one person.
I think there are two officers in the room who have also read it, and I commend, and I congratulate them for doing so. This is quite a good news piece of work for us. The council secures carbon offset monies through the Carbon Offset Planning Obligations (SPD). To date, we have secured about 93,000, but we forecast to collect, I think, something like 6 million and bordering on 2 million annually. The report that is here, and the Mayor has a couple of copies and we can send it to you electronically, sets out recommendations for the priorities in which we should invest these carbon offset monies. They're divided up between three categories. The first being fuel poverty, the second being retrofit, the third being community fund. In terms of fuel poverty, the mechanism proposed is to address particularly private sector housing properties where residents are suffering from fuel poverty. Retrofit guidance is recommended through this report in terms of the buildings which are least energy efficient, and there's a priority list within here, and the community fund is designed to empower and engage the community. The report also explains how progress on the projects will be referred back to Cabinet in paragraph 3.33 to 3.36.
Okay, very grateful for that. I shouldn't have been so supercilious about it. It is a very important piece of work, particularly in its ability to address both fuel poverty and sustainability. And I think people have gone off sustainability a bit. I think they became worried about husky hugging or whatever it was that we were meant to be impressed by previously. And we do need to be very urgent about this. And I'm very clear about the link between the carbon problems and global warming and poverty. Very often it's people with limited resources who suffer most as a result of the impacts on the environment and the cost of living and so on. So I'm very happy to agree the recommendation of the report. We need to keep quite an active watch on this, and indeed will do so. So no observations from members? No? Okay. Okay. How many going around the table? How many of you read this report? Councillor Edgar? Yes. Of course. Councillor Saunders? No. Councillor Amy, no? Councillor Pearce as a guest member. You always do. Have you read it?
Sadly, I did.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing sad. You should be proud of that. And Asma Begum? Not yet. Ayas Mir? Part of it. Okay. That's good. That's a good answer. Sharia? It's skimming through now. So that's a very nifty political answer. Okay, so I'm happy to agree the recommendations, but I really thank our officers who work hard on producing this strategy, and we need to get ourselves up to better speed on our sustainability agenda and on maximising the quality of life for local residents, but also addressing this pretty important global need. So it's very grand, isn't it? So happy to agree the recommendations on 5.11. We move on to 5.12. Commissioning of adult social care and supported housing contracts, and that is for Councillor Gidlock-Whites.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a really important paper. This is a really important paper to resolve a number of historic inherited issues with contracts in adult social care and supported housing. Officers have undertaken a review of all of the contracts and identified some challenges that we need to resolve tonight. Paragraph 3.4 of the paper talks about some of the reasons for the issues that we're facing. The aim of the paper is twofold, really. So to provide immediate sustainability and compliance for these contracts, and crucially to provide longer-term stability for services, both for staff and service users, through retendering a number of these contracts. So it's quite a number of contracts referred to. So just for ease, there are essentially two groups of contracts in question. The ones listed at paragraph 3.2 have in some cases have already expired, or in other cases are due to expire very soon and need retendering. The contracts in Appendix 1 are still within time. They had originally a +1 extension facility granted within the original contract terms, and so we need to extend those contracts within their original terms. So the decisions that are being requested of you, Mayor, are to commence the tendering processes for all of the contracts listed at paragraph 3.2, which, just to emphasise, includes the retendering of the home care services or domiciliary care services, which is a really important element of the social care budget and indeed quite a large contract. So the recommendation is that we commence tender processes for all of those and that we authorise the amounts concerned. The second kind of key decision is around authorising longer contract terms, so that we don't get into a situation again where we have short-term contracts which need to be continually renewed. The third is about awarding those extensions to all of the contracts in paragraph 3.3. So the ones where where they've either expired or they're due to expire, we need to extend those contracts now, straight away, so that they're compliant. And that paragraph 3.3 sets out the periods of time for each contract that they need to be extended for to allow that retendering that I've already mentioned to happen for each of them. And then finally, it requests that you delegate to officers the power to extend all of the contracts mentioned in Appendix 1, which is extending an original contract that had that +1 extension within them, and to delegate to officers that they can award the contracts which go through the retendering process. So it's quite complicated, so there are a number of different stages. The other things I wanted to draw your attention to are that at 3.5, it talks about member involvement in the retendering process, and that's already underway in relation to home care retendering, and a number of Cabinet members have been involved in discussions about how we would shape that tender. So that's open to us for other contracts as well, and if people want to be involved, I'll talk to them about that with officers and myself. Also, paragraph 3.9 to 3.10 are important. That sets out the management arrangements that officers have put in place from December to more closely manage all of the contracts in terms of their procurement periods, to make sure that we don't get into a similar situation in future, and that they are regularly reviewing when we need to retender and extend, so that we don't have to extend contracts retrospectively. So essentially, it's a big tidying up exercise and a request that we can commence some really important procurement, in particular the home care retendering, but a number of other contracts as well. And Keith is here if we have technical questions.
Hiding in the corner, yes. So are there any questions or observations on this report? It's pretty important stuff, and I think we've discussed before at Cabinet some of the contracts which have been delayed for reasons we haven't always quite understood, and we need to get a move on with bringing this stuff out into the open and regularising our contracts. I note in paragraph 3.10 that we're giving a responsibility to Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs to keep an eye on the way in which this new officer-led process is being conducted, and it's very important that she does that assiduously. Good. We have a pledge in public there to that end. That's very good. So I'm happy to agree with the recommendations in the report, and I don't think we need any clarification on that. So we move on. Can I suggest we actually take, I've just looked up the rest of the agenda. If we take item 516, which is the cycle strategy, then that might allow Councillors Golds and Chesterton to leave before the whole meeting is finished, because they both have an interest in it. And Councillor Chesterton is my cycle champion. You didn't necessarily all know that I had one. And Peter Golds has indicated a desire to speak on this item, and our lead officer is Margaret. Is that right? Margaret Cooper, yep, who's in the room as well. So there's been quite a long scrutiny of this work. Who wants to speak to it first?
Yeah.
Environment. Is Councillor Ayasmia? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. This report seeks the approval for a new cycle strategy to be adopted by the Council, and the document demonstrates the level of commitment to improving the cycling in the borough and has been strongly supported by the public. Indeed, I am very pleased to report that the online consultation attached well over 400 replies from a good cross-section of the community. And this was much higher level of the response from previously achieved in similar exercise and was deliberately influenced by the prize draw offer of a new Brompton bike. I'm pleased to announce that the winner of that bike is MS Webster from Bow. To reflect the political commitment to the cycling, the Mayor has appointed Councillor Chesterton, as he mentioned, as the cycling champion, and I would like to invite Councillor Chesterton to comment on the strategy itself, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to summarise the cycle strategy. The last 5 months have been an exciting time in bringing together our aspirations for improving cycling. It's important to note the value and close working relationships with local cycling groups, in particular Tower Hamlets Wheelers. This is reflected in the document, and I have already seen myself a stronger relationship developing as a result of this. The strategy contains a number of exciting proposals, and I give you a few examples here. We will be bringing forward as quickly as possible opportunities to demonstrate that what we say here is what we'll do. There will be secure on-street cycle parking lockers for residents and car-bike ports in shopping areas. They'll be introduced in the next month or so. And consultation will begin on a radical vision to transform the cycle superhighway 3 on Cable Street for the benefit of the whole community, not just cyclists. We'll also be working on a scheme to improve cycling on Manchester Road. Again, this will benefit the whole community, in this instance particularly through traffic calming. We have a quite significant challenge to work with owners of larger housing schemes and those who are building new ones to be more imaginative about cycle storage, which in too many schemes is simply neither safe nor secure. Part of my role in championing cycle improvements is to monitor the delivery of this strategy, and I intend to provide an annual report on progress as we move forward. This strategy is live and it will require refreshing following the adoption of our new local plan and the new London Mayor's transport strategy. And I commend this strategy to members for your approval. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Chesterton, for your agreeing to take up this responsibility. Councillor Goals, you wanted to make some submissions. Hopefully you're gonna speak praisingly in support of Manchester Road.
Well, yes, of course, I do take a great deal of interest in Manchester Road, which is unsurprising. I was a little concerned about having fought for years for safety in the Greenwich Foot Tunnel that the London Borough of Greenwich are considering allowing cycling in there, which may well be a retrogressive step. I would imagine the cyclists ought to be able to walk the short distance from one end of the Greenwich Foot Tunnel to the other. The thing that concerned me is on page 463, and I quote directly, the London Borough of Tower Hamlets has the highest number of hit and run collisions in London, and therefore I think we need to be very, very concerned on that. It is an issue that is of potential tragedy, and therefore the strategy needs to encompass that. And one of the things that does concern me is that a cycling strategy has to be on both sides, and standing in Manchester Road, as I do so regularly, and indeed West Ferry Road, is not all cyclists, and I fear to say that rather too large numbers of them are aware that they should be on the road, not on the pavement, that it would help if it's in darkness they have lights, that it is not terribly easy to cycle whilst texting because you're not concentrating on anybody else on the road. It is very clever if you're in the Tour de France to do the last part of it no-handed, but if you're on a road in London and you hit a bump in the road, anything else, then you could well end up under a lorry or a car or indeed, as I saw recently, a D7 bus. and that traffic lights are there to help everybody, as are zebra crossings. Now, I have raised this with Tower Hamlets wheelers, and they say, oh, no, this doesn't happen. Sad to say it does, and this is a point of education that we need to do, that we need to be needs to be all-sided. The wheelers do an extremely good job. They're very important, but they're not the only stakeholders. Pedestrians, motorists, and everybody else needs to be involved. Finally, I would say that one of the things we are doing, and one of the good things we're doing on the Tower Hamlets cycling strategy, we are avoiding some of the pitfalls in other parts of London. I'm delighted to be a London Borough Councillor that has no surgery inquiries about what are known in other parts of London as mini Hollands. And I think that we have well managed to avoid that, possibly by working very, very widely with everybody concerned. But I would hope that the report is agreed, and I very much hope there is an education strategy on all sides, and that includes cyclists as well as other road users.
Okay, I think we welcome those comments. Can I ask my champion, the Wonder Councillor, to advise? Do we welcome those comments?
Yeah, broadly, I think we do. I mean, I'm a cyclist, I'm a pedestrian, and I'm a driver of a car as well.
Hopefully not at the same time.
No, generally not. But I think that some of the comments that Councillor Gold is making are true. I think that we could also be levelling the same kinds of criticisms at both those who drive vehicles and those who sometimes are walking. So I think there is a big education issue, actually, and I think my personal view is that the relationship between pedestrians, car users and cyclists in this country is still relatively immature, and we have a long way to go to improve the behaviour of everybody who's using our public highways.
I'd agree with the last part of what you said. I'm somewhat more sympathetic to Councillor Gold's comments than you are, I guess, because I think increasingly we should encourage cycling and healthy lifestyles, of which cycling is a good example, but we do need to be clear about the behaviour we expect out of cyclists as well. And some people feel that the cycling fraternity lets itself down when some of its members don't behave with the same sensitivity as the majority of them do. And it'd be quite good if we could get more and more young people in the borough to feel confident about cycling, and if the image that was attached to it was even more positive than it is at present. But Councillor Blake has been provoked into intervening.
Can you advise if there's a process in place for distributing the on-site bike storage hoops?
Can we ask Margaret to speak?
Of the on-street residential bike parking lockers, we're initially responding to those areas where we've had some requests already to target those because we know there's a demand there. We'll see how those go in terms of usage and vulnerability to any vandalism or anything like that, and then we'll promote more of those where possible. And the car bike ports, which are a sort of car-shaped frame, which has 5 stands for cycle parks, they give a message saying this parking space is actually being used by 10 people rather than 1 car. They'll be targeted more in shopping centres for passing trade.
And in terms of design guidelines, we've come across some pretty catastrophically bad examples of cycle storage, and they get vandalised and they're used as whatever they are, rain shelters for people or whatever. But are we clear that we are going to try to ensure that housing developers and others and social landlords provide good quality ones that actually work and don't become something other than what they're meant to be?
Exactly, and part of that's about the scale of the amount of cycle parking we're asking for in new developments, and making sure that it's not just a vast space that's not used at all, that it's friendly for users and feels secure.
Town has a bit of a legendary reputation for cycle theft as well, I think. I don't know if that's less bad than it was. I remember I once found my ex-wife's bike 6 months later lying in a Sainsbury's car park after it had been nicked. So that was quite... And then I bought one part of it back from a cycle shop in the borough, which was less good. But But are we in a slightly better state with cycle thefts in the borough?
We've done quite a lot of activity through the community safety team in Brick Lane area particularly, and monitoring that. And we're doing quite a lot more work with the police now on speed enforcement linked to the 20-mile-an-hour scheme. And they did an Operation Safeway initiative around cycle superhighways, which was very effective in improving the behaviour of the cyclists in recognising traffic regs as well, and they'll be continuing that, I think, in the future.
And of course, quite a lot of cyclists do receive fixed penalty notices for breaking bits of the law. And there was a splurge of this, because it's predominantly done by the Metropolitan Police Service under Boris Johnson a couple of years back, but it seems to have died off. So it'd be good if we could give the signal that we want to encourage good behaviour. We don't want to penalise people randomly, but we need to find other ways of encouraging good behaviour.
Yeah.
The officer agrees with me, as indeed all officers agree with everything that I say, which is remarkable. I'd like them to agree with me a bit less, actually, because I can't get everything right. But thank you very much. Thanks for all your work on this, Margaret. Shall we agree the recommendations in the report? Yep, and thank everyone, particularly Councillor Goals, for his work on this. Okay, if we move backwards then to item 513, which is about the future commissioning arrangements for the domiciliary care services previously commissioned from Majlis Home Care Services. This came to the previous meeting, and we narrowed down the possibilities, and now we can talk a bit more about it.
Thank you, Mayor. So, as you've said, this came to the previous meeting. Just briefly to remind people, Majlis was brought in-house under the previous administration in order to sustain the service when it was experiencing difficulties. That was back in 2014, February, March time. The intention was only ever to bring it in-house temporarily, to put the service on a sustainable footing, and then to find a way to transfer the service back out to the market. Unfortunately, this was not progressed sufficiently speedily under the previous administration. We discussed this at the last meeting and ruled out 4 of the 6 options that officers have considered over the previous months. 3.8 reminds you what those options were, and we ruled out options C to F for various reasons, which I can talk about again if people want to. The Mayor and I asked officers to do more work on options A and B. Option A was originally recommended, and that is to put the packages of care back out onto the existing provider framework. Option B would be to retain the services in-house until the full retender of home care services. As I mentioned with the previous paper, we've now managed to progress the development of that. So given where we are in terms of timing and a number of other considerations around legal compliance, value for money, wanting to provide security for service users currently supported by Majlis, but also security for staff in that service who've been under uncertainty for a while now, we believe that option B is the preferred option, so that's what officers are recommending. The decisions that are being proposed are on page 378, and the recommendations are that you agree to retender the Majlis services as part of the broader home care retender that we agreed in item 512. And the idea is that that will be retendered as quickly as procurement processes allow, so that the services would be live from November of this year. The second recommendation is to authorise the Director of Adult Services and other directors to undertake what's required in relation to CHUPI to ensure that the current staff are supported to transfer out to whoever is commissioned to provide the services currently delivered by Majlis, or what's now known as FIDES internally. Thirdly, to enter into necessary negotiations with staff and unions around their continuous employment with the council up until the tender process is complete and they're transferred out, to provide some more security for staff. And fourthly, just to note really your commitment, Mayor, to the Ethical Care Charter, and that will be a key part of the re-procurement of the whole home care services, and as such that includes a range of improvements to terms and conditions which staff that are currently working for Majlis would benefit from if they were transferred out to providers once that home care retender is completed. So the recommendation is to progress option B and basically retain the service in-house until we've completed that retender. And there's lots of other information in the report, most of which we've seen before, but Keith's here again and can come forward to the table if people have questions, or I can try to answer them.
Are there any questions? I'm happy to say a little bit more about this. So myself and Councillor Amy Whitecott-Gibbs have had more meetings about this matter than about any other matter, and it's been left hanging around within the Council for a while now, and I don't think we'll ever really know quite why it was delayed for as long as it was, but we need to get a move on. My preference of the options would have been to get a move on with option A, but I think we had some very detailed legal advice and conversations, and concluded that option B was the safer one, and for a whole number of reasons, which can be examined if people need to at a later date, because I want us to be transparent about this. It is a contractual matter in the end, though, so we need to go forward to tendering. Very much value the work that our care workers provide, and that's one of the reasons why I was keen to endorse the Ethical Care Charter, which a number of other local authorities have done, which is about it's about answering the fundamental question. First of all, do we want people to have decent terms and conditions of employment? But secondly, if one of your family members needed care, would you want to have a well-motivated and adequately trained workforce helping to look after them with some continuity of care? And I think most people would take the view that that should be the desirable outcome. And so we want to make sure we have a valued workforce which is supported adequately. And so that's why I'm very keen on the Ethical Care Charter. But I'm happy to agree the recommendation in the report unless there are any other observations from members, or unless there's anything that needs to be brought to our attention by our lawyers, because we know that this is a quite contentious matter. There was actually one other thing there, which was, just for the record as well, I received representations, I think some other members did as well, from some of the workers who asked whether we would be in a position to support the option C, which is about the public sector mutual model. And it's fairly apparent to myself and to Councillor Amy Whitecott-Gibbs and to officers that this is not a unified opinion amongst the workers, and that the capacity that's apparent in terms of the ability to put together such a mutual is very unclear in a very competitive market. I guess it might be that mutual options could come forward as part of the tendering, although I think that's probably somewhat fanciful at this stage. But I just wanted to be clear about this, that I have been given representations, and we discussed this at some further length, whether option C could be reopened, and the view was taken that this didn't really make sense on the timeline we're working to, particularly given that we need to get a move on and get these contracts onto a more regular footing. Do you want to add to that, Councillor Whitecott-Gibbs?
So just for the purposes of transparency, I also was forwarded a representation from different staff members to the Mayor, which actually expressed concern about the public sector mutual option, so from staff who didn't want that option to be pursued. And to me, that made clear what the Mayor said around the divisions within the workforce about what they believe the best way forward is. We've discussed all of these options at length, but in terms of the public sector mutual option, that was discussed quite a lot under the previous administration. It's not in this paper, but the original Cabinet paper, which is obviously public from December, talks about that option in more detail. One of the key success criteria where those options have worked in other areas has been a really unified staff body that will take that forward and drive it, because that's the nature of a mutual. And additionally, as Keith would say if he was sitting at the table, usually those kinds of models are more successful in less competitive marketplaces, whereas less mature markets. And so the worry would be if we supported, as it said in the previous Cabinet paper, if we supported the development of a mutual and gave it support for a couple of years, when a retender came up, they may not be able to compete for those services as effectively in such a competitive market, and we don't want to set the service and the staff up to fail in that way. So that's all I'd add, really.
Okay, does anyone want to add to that? I suppose for the record, I should declare I'm a member of the Co-op Party. and I do strongly support mutual models of service provision if we can make them work. And so it's with a slightly heavy heart that I formed the conclusion that this wasn't an option given the timeline and the circumstances we face. And so I'm happy to agree the recommendations in the report. So shall we move on then to item 5.14, which is collaborative agreement on sexual health, and our office has been waiting patiently for 9 hours now for this item. Again, it's for Councillor Whitelock-Gibbs to present to us, I think.
Sorry. So I think Chris is here. If he
Can I thank, as they leave the room, our officers for doing all the work they have on the care services, because it's been quite a laboured determination. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Chris from Public Health is here to answer questions and to add things that I miss. This is a positive paper which proposes that we join up with other London boroughs to collaborate around sexual health commissioning. Why would we do this? There's a number of reasons which are set out on page 397, but the key ones for me are there's a huge need for sexual health provision in Tower Hamlets, as people will no doubt be aware, and across London, but we know that that need is particularly acute locally. It's also one of the biggest pressures in the public health budget, huge area of spend, and that spend is growing. And the particular challenge for sexual health services is the kind of fluidity and complexity of access that people can have across London. And the reason that causes challenges in terms of budget pressure is that essentially the services are free anywhere. So we could go somewhere in central London and receive that service, then Tower Hamlets would be billed for that provision of that service for that client. The challenge there is that disproportionately people from kind of non-Zone 1, I suppose, boroughs will go to central London for support, and we have less leverage as a commissioner in Tower Hamlets over Chelsea and Westminster services, for example. So we need to collaborate with other boroughs across London to drive down the prices and drive down the cost of those sexual health services to ensure they're, yes, of course, that they're good quality, but that they're giving us the best value as well. And we've seen the costs rising, and we have, through some successful joint working with a smaller group of local authorities, we've already saved some money, I think it's 2-point-something million, through negotiating on price in partnership with others who do have those more direct commissioning relationships with the relevant providers of sexual health services. So there's a real need to join up to get a better deal more broadly, and the recommendations, there are 5, but basically they ask us to join formally the London Sexual Health Transformation Project and give the appropriate delegations to officers to enter into that, to agree to enter into a pan-London procurement for a web-based service which would improve access to sexual health support for people and also improve partner notification and allow people to do home and self-sampling and testing. And the sort of biggest bit really is the sub-regional commissioning, so asking you, Mayor, to approve our participation in sub-regional arrangements to commission sexual health services in the future and to delegate appropriate contract awards to officers to allow those joint commissioned services to be brought forward. We have talked about this in other forums, and I suppose the other things to highlight really are obviously joining up with other boroughs in terms of commissioning. There will be risks inherent in that, and they're detailed in the financial and legal comments. But as I think we've discussed before, one of the bigger risks would be not doing this and the costs of sexual health services continuing to rise and us not having sufficient bargaining power and leverage to engage with the different sexual health providers across London. So lots of other London boroughs are engaging in this. It's about 22 in total, and they're listed in the paper. Also in the paper, page 397, you can see the vision for the future services, and page 398 basically emphasises the importance of collaboration, which I've covered. So I hope that's clear, but Chris is here as well to answer questions.
Okay, are there any questions from members? I think this is it's a very important area. And Councillor Whitelock Gibbs said that everyone knows about it, but I have a feeling there is quite a deep-set ignorance in our community about the need for good sexual health. I mean, obviously everyone knows the basis of this, but we need to be perhaps a bit more open as a community about the need to for people to be referred and to deal with the challenges that we face as a community for all sorts of reasons. And can I thank our officers for the work they have been doing in this area. And if there are no further questions, I'm very happy for us to endorse this approach. And it has financial benefits as well for us, given the growth in demand for the services. But so thank you. Yep. Okay, happy to agree that one. So our final one then, I think, is it the final one? Is the Unpaid Carer Scrutiny Challenge Session Report and Action Plan, which for some reason it comes under me. Why does it come under me? I think it comes under you, actually. Yeah, I certainly have no plans to speak on this, but go for it.
I was going to invite Councillor Asma Begum to say a few words, as she was the scrutiny lead that wrote the report first, if that's okay, Mayor, and then I'll respond.
So the challenge session was focused on the changes in the Care Act, which came into force in April 2015. The challenge session looked at how the Council was implementing the legislation. The report provides an action plan to the recommendations on how the Council and the NHS can support unpaid carers in Tower Hamlets. This report is to be noted and to agree the action plan on page 423 onwards. And would you like to add anything to that, AB?
Thanks, Asma. I really welcome this. We have huge numbers of unpaid carers in the borough. I'm sure other members will have had casework in relation to people who care for their families, and it's a huge challenge for those people. And I think it's important we recognise how much they do for the community and for the council, because in a lot of cases they are supporting family members to remain in the home. They're not requiring social care support in lots of instances, and they are not requiring to go into residential care. And obviously that's financially beneficial to the council, but hugely beneficial to those individuals being cared for. And so it's right that we improve how we support the carers, how we care for the carers. There's also been a legal change, as Councillor Begum referenced, and just to remind people, on page 201 of today's agenda pack in relation to strategic monitoring, it did refer to the fact that we've completed the implementation of the carers elements of the Care Act, which include things like carers assessments for people and a carers plan. Since this came forward, Councillor Begum and I have met with officers and worked hard to strengthen the action plan. And there's lots of good stuff in the action plan, I hope you agree. Particularly, I'm really quite excited about the idea that we will co-produce with the Carers Centre a new carers strategy, so work with carers to find out what they need and want from the council, and that we want to pilot a one-year dedicated role to give that carers agenda additional focus within the council, and to support that strategy being developed. And we've also talked about making sure that whatever we deliver for carers is kind of delivered in a way that makes sense to them. So that's where the action plan on page 423 refers to shaping it around user statements that are about what they need from us and what we pledge to deliver for carers. And there's lots of other actions around communications, training for carers, ensuring that we complete assessments in a timely way, and that they get feedback when they aren't eligible for support, so that people aren't left not knowing what's happening for periods of time. So it's a really, really good scrutiny report. So thank you, Councillor Begum, for for doing it last year. And I know that officers are really committed to this agenda as well, and I'm hoping it's something we can keep high on our political priorities as well, Mayor.
Thanks for that, and I'd like us to do that as well. There's a self-interest in terms of informal carers preventing additional workloads on the local authority and our resources, of course, but there's also a sort of humanitarian approach in terms of supporting people who can become very isolated. Of course, carers quite often for older people are elderly themselves, and I think I've spoken previously about the impact on people's income levels of being a carer, because not only if you're a carer for another adult is that adult quite likely not earning, but as a carer you may not be earning yourself, and so issues of poverty, I think, are quite often understated, and it's a very good example of how people might focus on a disability without thinking about some of the other consequences of that. So I'm very keen to endorse this and see whether we can do more work to help support carers in our community, including publicity, so people are aware of what services they can access.
Just to add one more thing that I forgot to mention, since you mentioned income and poverty, in light of conversations we've had in other Cabinet forums about welfare reform and the impact that that will have, Councillor Begum and I have been given joint responsibility for ensuring that when we have those further discussions about our strategy around welfare reform and our response going forward, that as well as kind of obviously disabled people and older people on lower incomes, that we consider carers really explicitly in how we develop the welfare reform response.
Okay, I'm happy to agree with the recommendations. So we only have one further report, which is the list of Mayor's individual executive decisions, and I'm happy to move that we note these, unless members have any particular questions on them. I signed another one today, which will be reported to the next Cabinet. This was to endorse a strategy discussed with our beloved commissioners about the publication of East End Life. So look forward to further discussions on that exciting matter. And unless there are any questions, I don't have any other matters of business. I'm happy to agree the recommendation to myself. On the item 517, there's no item under 6. There's no confidential business. Is there? Nope. So I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.